just another day. But there in that place, you've got, of course, the master of the house and his family, servants, and then you've got people that have been invited, and then you've got some lawyers and some Pharisees, which are kind of like scripture lawyers. And Jesus really embodies God's invitation, right? Jesus is God made man. God didn't just leave it to writing or phone it in. He sent His own Son to get it across to us, to remove everything in the way, every challenge to overcome. And so as we read this, just be seeing Jesus in this setting as the invitation. Just Him being there saying, you are invited. Notice, of course, who gets it, who doesn't get it. Just notice and take some observations as I read, beginning with verse 1. One Sabbath day. Kind of like today. He went out to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, and they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy, and Jesus responded to the lawyers and the Pharisees, saying, tell me, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they remained silent. Then he took, and he healed the man, and he sent him away. And he said to them, which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on the Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out? Well, they couldn't respond to these things. And so he told a parable to those who were invited. When he noticed how they chose the places of honor, he said to them, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you, being invited by the master, and who has invited you both, will come and say, give your place to this person. And then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But rather, when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. He said also to the man who invited him there, when you give a dinner or a banquet, don't invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and then you will be blessed, because they can't repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. When one of those who reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said, well, blessed is everyone who will eat the bread in the kingdom of God. But Jesus said, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time for the banquet, he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, come, for everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, I bought a field, and so I must go out and see it. Please have me excused. Another said, I've bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. So please have me excused. Still another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So the servant came and reported these things to his master. And then the master of the house became angry. And he said to his servant, go out quickly to the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame. The servant said, sir, what you have commanded has now been done, and behold, there is still room. So the master said to the servant, now go out to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet. Now, a couple things just to notice before we dive in here. Number one, I guess I said this before, that there's a lot of religious folks around. Okay? And so he's telling this story kind of in their face, demonstrating their reluctance, inability to recognize God's invitation despite all their apparent knowledge about God. But more than that, as we kind of begin to zoom in on this text, another thing is kind of still big picture, is we just recognize in this parable about the feast that there's a master who does the inviting. The invited guests, the expected ones, the most likely, don't make it. And the master gets angry. He doesn't get hurt. He gets angry. I think we got to note that. And then, more than that, we see here the master's will. It's that the banquet will be full. That he is going to share a feast and joy with people. That's the bottom line. Okay? So if that's the bottom line, the big picture, I want to now work through this last parable. He tells a couple stories here, but beginning in verse 16, he tells the parable beginning with, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many. Now this is a common practice in that day and age where a lord, and this isn't just an average anybody, this is usually a lord or a king, somebody of high station who sends their own emissary, their personal emissary, right? And in a sense, that person represents all that the king has and who he is, his station, his rank. And so to disrespect the servant is to disrespect the master and his household. Also, to rescind or turn away an invitation is also to disrespect the hospitality of the one who wants the joy of your presence. Okay? And so these were things that these people, the original hearers, would have known and just be used to and would have automatically kind of interpreted from the text that maybe we won't. And that's why I take the time to point them out. But let's just work through this verse by verse. Verse 17 says, it was the time for the banquet. It's also dinner time. That's kind of what the essence of this is. It was time. It was time for this to take place. The master had prepared it. And I think we have to notice something about the master. And of course, the master here is representative of God. It says something about who he is, isn't it? Doesn't it? Could have prepared a lot of things, had a lot of plans, but it's a time of rejoicing and feasting and sharing of all things good and intimate. That it says something about who he is, and it says something about what God has as his own desires. Just think about that. God who can make anything, do anything. He desires your presence. He wants to be with you. He wants your heart. He just come. You don't have to bring anything. You don't have to pay him. It's dinner time. Can you hear that dinner bell ringing? It's time. Well, he sent his servant, and I have to say, this is like Jesus. This is an example of Jesus. And of course, Jesus, even as he's telling this, he's telling it to the Pharisees, and they're not getting it, even though in a big way it's talking about them. They don't get it. They're demonstrating unknowingly, even as they think they're judging him and observing him, they're being read like a book. Dinner time, he sent his own precious servant to say to those who had been invited, come on, it's ready, it's time. Verse 18, but they all alike, the original text is, in one voice, began to make excuses. Now, before we look at these three excuses, they are symbolic. Not that they don't have a literal meaning, they do. But I believe that they are symbolic and they speak to a larger understanding. But before we go there, we have to realize that he says they in one voice. One voice. It's basically saying it's just the way humans talk. It's the way they think. It all kind of blends into the same thing. And the same thing is, yeah, but not right now. I've got something else going on. There's something else that's important. Oh, I've got this reason I can't make it. Oh, God, maybe tomorrow. Oh, I forgot. Without turning, I'll just read something really quick for you because I said these three examples are symbolic. They are types, in other words, of excuses in one voice all humans make. Okay? And I just want to read a few verses from 1 John 2. I'm just going to read 15 to 17. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, you know, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world that is passing away along with its desires. Lust or desire of the eyes. You ever heard the term feast your eyes? The lust of the flesh, what our flesh desires, and the pride of life. I am making it on my own. I've got a plan. I'm going to subdue. I will overcome. Those three things are represented here in these three excuses that are responses to God's personal invitation. The first we see here in verse 18, and it says, I have bought a field, and so I must go out and see it. Please have me excused. This person has bought some property, it says, and they've got to go survey the land. Now, okay, that makes some sense, but you got to kind of broaden your scope just a little bit to consider, why do you buy land? One of the prime reasons is it's a place to live. It's a place to call your own. It's a place where, man, before you build on it, you may dream. You dream about your future. What will we do here? Maybe it's a young man and he's buying this piece of land and he's thinking about maybe finding a wife one day and maybe having kids, and maybe he's imagining those kids running around. I got to say, it's such a blessing to see my boys in the backyard running around with a dog. I see it and I just thank God for it. It's just an amazing sight just to see that. But he buys this land, and this great king who cares deeply for him, it's more important that he goes out and surveys this land that he has bought. And I think that's something else to realize, and how it ties into the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. I bought this. This is mine. I own it. I'm a master of my own kingdom. I'm going to spend my time thinking about what I want to think and what I desire, what I want to happen. Yeah, God, I know you're out there, or I believe you're out there in some sense, but maybe tomorrow. I see my life and I see my future my way. The way my physical eyes see it. The way my flesh desires it to be. Please, another time. Well, the second, we see in 19, and another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I must go and examine them, so please have me excused. 5 yoke of oxen was a lot. Most people would maybe have 1 or 2. 5, it's really saying it's a big investment, right? As Jesus says, where a man's heart is, there will his treasure be also. So this big investment. An investment in what? Material things. But not just that. The first one we could kind of think of in terms of fulfillment in life, achieving of life's goals. This one we have to definitely see is related to work. Not just work in itself, but what does work represent for us? An ability to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? It's a means, right? It's a way of getting ahead in this world. It's a place you can find, or a thing you can find pride in and self-identity in. I just bought 5 head of oxen, and I'm going to go examine them. And as I do, I'm going to think about all the work they're going to do and all the money I can make off of it. Going to think about all the things I'm going to buy with it. Do you see how all this kind of works together with that lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh, the things that just I'm constantly desiring. And of course, the pride of life. It all just works together, you see. And Jesus says, even though he tells these separately, he says they're all pretty much saying the same thing. It's one voice. They're all just kind of saying the same thing. About 5 yoke of oxen, and I got to go inspect them. There will be time for partying later. There will be time for intimacy later. And mind you, we got to keep tying this back into the context, the immediate context. You got all these religious people hearing this. He's telling it to them, and really for them, in their face. And he's basically saying they are missing the invitation. They are refusing the invitation. And they don't even see the invitation. That's pretty sad. Last one says, I have married, verse 20, I have married a wife and therefore cannot come. Now this one is, I guess, unique. They're all tied together, but this one's unique because he doesn't say, please excuse me. The others say, please excuse me. And what does that mean? When you say excuse me, you're acknowledging something, right? You're saying I shouldn't have done that, or maybe it would have been better if I had, something like that. You're acknowledging at least where they're coming from, right? You're acknowledging a duality, a contrast. This guy just says, I've married a wife. It's like it's just enough. Just in hearing, at face value, it's obvious. I can't come. Now, there's a little bit to go on here. Legally speaking, in that when you married, a man who had just gotten married had a period of time where he and his wife could be together. He couldn't be conscripted or sent to war, right? So there wasn't an understanding of that there in their culture. But that's really, there's nothing alluded to here. It's a feast. It's not a war. So he says, well, I've married a wife. Now, what is that? What does that mean? It obviously has to do with love. And I think all of these really do. Really begs the question, where is your heart? What do you love most? I can't go because I've married a wife. Well, we can make all kinds of excuses and we can blame them on other people. Or we can just simply respond to the invitation in kind. Recognizing what a blessing it is to be desired. Recognizing priority. There's time for things. I think it's true that you've probably heard it said, somebody dying on their deathbed, is rare, if ever, to say, I wish I would have spent more time at work, right? Or I wish I would have spent more time away from my family. Or, right, these aren't the types of things you hear. That's kind of the discussion here, isn't it? What matters most? What things may you not be able to get back? What things do we take for granted? Well, again, he's talking to the so-called religious know-it-alls. And yet, in all of their knowledge, they've missed the invitation. They've missed the heart of the invitation. Heart. It's just that they're desired. They're coming with all their rules and all their explanations, and yet all their rules and explanations of what they think they know actually keep them from obtaining it, enjoying it. And it's that part of our flesh that is always going to desire other things that keeps us away from what we actually were created to desire and to share and enjoy. Let's continue. So we've just saw 3 examples. We'll continue now with verse 21. So the servant comes and he reports these things to the master, and the master of the house becomes angry. And I think that's something to note. He's angered. His gift, his invitation is turned away. He's been told, no, something else is more important than you. I mean, think about that, right? It's like you call somebody. Have you ever had this happen? You call somebody and they're on the other line. And there's that moment where it's like, are they going to say, I'll call you back? Or do they say, here, just a minute? And then put you on hold, go hang up with the other person and talk to you. You see? And of course, Jesus has gotten done telling a very similar story when he says, hey, when you go to a feast, don't just immediately sit in the place of honor. Right? The master of the house becomes angry. And then he says, go out quickly. Just think about word choice here. He didn't have to say angry, and he didn't have to say quickly. But since he does, it says some things, doesn't it? It casts some colors, maybe some darker colors. Go out quickly. What does he say? To the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame. Now, who are the poor and the crippled and the blind and the lame? Well, we already know he told us these are the ones that can't repay you. Right? So we know that the desire of getting isn't the motivation here. Right? Right? We could say it's a desire to store up treasure in heaven, again, to be enjoyed. But I think the clearest thing to gather from this is just that these are people who can't help themselves. In other words, when the invitation comes in, there's nothing else that's competing. They know they don't have a better offer. In some way, in their simplicity and their brokenness, they have a greater wisdom, or are able to access a greater wisdom than all the religious people sitting here. All the so-called know-it-alls, not blind or lame, not physically at least. He says, go out, bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. The ones who are well aware and have just given up trying to fake it. The ones who see an invitation just for what it is. Something better than what they have. Well, it says in 22 that the servant responds to this, that we've already done this. They've come in, but there's even still room. And so the master then says to the servant, now go out to the highways and the hedges and compel people to come so that my house may be filled. The only reason given is what? So that my house may be filled. What does the master want? He wants his house filled. You've heard the term empty nester, right? I think about that even as I look out and see the kids with the dog and people playing in the house and all these sounds. I try to like mentally record them and visually file them away, because I know there will be a time when I look and I don't see people chasing dogs round and round and round in the house and throwing balls and causing problems. He wants his house to be filled. If your understanding of God is something that's like impersonal, it's something legalistic, it's based on rules and this and that, what you do and what you might do, it's something different than what we're talking about. It's about an invitation. It's about love for you. It's about an opportunity. It's about a removal of excuses. It's on you. It's on me. He just wants to be with us. He sent his own personal emissary, his only begotten Son. Yeah, he says now to send him out to the highways and the byways. This is the idea here, is to the people. Think about it. Out there's a highway, isn't there? We're here in Winnemucca. There's a highway and people are driving by, zooming by, right? Not even thinking about Winnemucca, not aware that there's a little church meeting over here and people being with God this morning. Maybe that's not on their agenda. They're not thinking about that. And they're just whizzing by. And so he says, go out there. And again, word choice, compel them. He doesn't just say, hey, you want to come in? Compel. It's a very strong word. It has the connotations here, physically even possibly, like pulling them in. Right? But these are people who are just whizzing through life. They're not the in crowd. They're not the ones maybe who grew up in church. They're not the expected ones. They're not the dignitary type. God wasn't on their agenda at all. Until somebody compelled them. Apprehended them from their normal everyday life. What? Huh? Oh, really? Where? Right now? I don't need to bring anything? Just me? Why would he want me? I just show up? Is that? No, I can't. Compel them to come in. And well, this is an invitation to all of us this morning. We have to look a little bit beyond that and recognize that we've been kind of invited in to do the inviting. We're in the compelling business. Right? We got to go look for them. It might take a little something to break into their whizzing by reality. So he says, go. Compel them to come in, because the bottom line here, people, is my house is going to be full. And it's going to be rocking. That's what he's saying. It's going to happen. That's his goal. That's what God wants. But then he says in the last verse, 24, for I tell you that none of these who were invited shall taste my banquet. Now again, just like that word angered and that word quickly, I think if this last verse wasn't on there, we wouldn't feel like it was missing. Right? But what does it say that it's there? What does it say about how God feels? Your answer is super, super important to him. It's not like he skips over, well, I got Max, but I didn't get so-and-so and so-and-so. That's not it at all. He wants everyone. Everyone is precious. That's why he made everyone. But then he says, Those who had better things to do shall never taste my banquet. Man. Maybe they get what they want in their little mind. Maybe they get the best use out of those oxen. Maybe they are able to build on that land and realize their human dreams. Maybe. But even if all of those dreams were fulfilled, what would that matter when compared to eternity in heaven with God Himself? A little hiccup life that we live compared to the expanse of infinity. All boils down to that. No excuses. It's an invitation. How will we respond? Cale, you go ahead and play. Let us just consider that as we hear this song, and then we'll pray.